Hey everybody, what's going on? Hellmite here, bringing you another video from Grab the Lantern today. Today I wanted to talk about Vex and why Vex I think is not only more anti-mobile than people think she is, but how Vex's version of anti-mobility is actually a lot healthier for the game than I think a lot of people are willing to admit or want to admit, right? And why this is actually a better design for the game overall. Now, there's been some discussion about how Vex was supposedly marketed as this super anti-mobility mage, right? Her whole shtick is that she's frustrated by all these hyperactive champions dashing around and she just wants them to stop moving, and how that's sort of thing she has, right? And then at the end of the day, though, she has exactly one ability, her passive, that is anti-mobility. In fact, she does have mobility in her own kit with her ultimate, and how that sort of feels like not enough, right? I think a lot of people were expecting a champion that could press a button and just stop all champions from dashing, right? Even I was predicting some sort of large AoE ability that would ground all nearby enemy champions and prevent them from therefore using any dashes, and how that would make sense for this champion that really hated mobile champions, and maybe even throw other, super reliable stuns or CC into the kit in order to help Vex counter them. And when Vex came out, I think there was some disappointment then when she didn't have that in her kit, right? There was no super hard counter. Now, I'll talk a little bit about why I think Vex does have a very, very strong counter to mobility in general in her kit here in a bit. But first, I wanted to kind of address why soft counters versus hard counters, and why I think Vex is not only a bit more of a soft counter, or her abilities at least are a bit more of a soft counter, but also why soft counters, I think, are a better thing for League of Legends as a whole. Now, in case you're not familiar, soft counters versus hard counters, a soft counter is something that stops a particular strategy from happening, or rather, doesn't stop it from happening, but makes it significantly weaker in order to help you fight back against it without completely negating that strategy in the first place. A good example of this would be actually Grievous Wounds, which I know I have my own complaints about, but Grievous Wounds, at least the 40% Grievous Wounds, are a good example of a soft counter, right? They cut healing by 40%, so if the champion's entire shtick, right, revolves around there's supposed to be a lot of healing in their kit, and you buy Grievous Wounds aren't going to stop them from healing, right? Mundo can still press R and get a bunch of health back and do a lot of healing over time, but what it does do is it limits Dr. Mundo's ability to continuously heal. It does make him slightly weaker in that regard, so that maybe you can sort of play around him or play against him without having to deal with the truly insane amount of healing he can get. Now, that's a soft counter. A hard counter would be something that just straight up negates a strategy entirely. It says you don't get to play the game, or you don't get to do this strategy because this champion 100% completely in every regard stops this strategy from happening. Now, we don't have very many of those in League of Legends. The few I can think of are especially the champions in the game that have the ability to completely destroy shields on enemy champions, right? So something like Renekton Empowered W or Blitzcrank R. You're set, you're running around, you press your W, get a massive shield, wind up for your punch, Blitz R's, and that entire shield goes away instantly, right? That's a hard counter. Set doesn't get that shield at all because Blitzcrank was there and basically said that shield is going away immediately. If the set has a Sterak's gauge as well, or if you have a bunch of champions stacking shields on a single AD carry in like a traditional protect the AD carry style composition, again, those shields are removed immediately and you no longer have that ability to do anything about it, right? In that regard, that's sort of a soft versus hard counter scenario, right? Where you are being hard countered in that regard. You don't get to do the thing that you're intending to do. And hard counters, while they can be very satisfying to play as, in that you do have the ability to essentially look at an enemy champion and say, whatever button you're trying to do, whatever play you're trying to make, I just get to straight up stop you. That's pretty bad from a plays against standpoint, because especially depending on what the hard counter is, there may not be a way to play around it, right? There may not actually be a winning move to take if the enemy champion has the capability of just stopping you outright. Now, currently, even the examples I gave of hard counters in League of Legends aren't that hard of counters, right? Set will still get the shield. It might be for an instant, but he still gets the shield. If Blitzcrank's R is on cooldown because he used it previously, he doesn't have the ability to instantly break that shield. If Renekton doesn't have his empowered W, right, if the empowered ability he used was an empowered Q, then again, he doesn't get the ability to just break the shield instantly, and therefore you're not hard countered. So, even in that regard, League of Legends doesn't have very many hard counters, and I think that's for the best because, like I said, hard counters just invalidate certain strategies or invalidate certain champions from existing in the game, which feels pretty bad to play as if you are those champions. And while it can be very easy to say, well, that champion's annoying and I want the ability to just completely shut them out of the game. Imagine how it would feel if your favorite champion had a hard counter introduced to the game and whatever they were trying to do was suddenly shut out, right? It's really easy to say, well, yeah, a champion like Yasuo who dashes around all the time or a champion like Aurelia who dashes around all the time are annoying, and I want a champion that just says they don't get to dash at all for 5 seconds. But imagine a world in which Riot introduced a champion that can silence champions for 5 seconds, and all of a sudden all of the Ryze players or Cassiopeia players are quaking in their boots because they don't get to play the game, right? The only thing they can do is auto attack, which on those champions is irrelevant, or otherwise run away and wait for the silence to wear off. That feels pretty bad to play as, and as someone who was around when a lot more champions had targeted silences, that was a pretty difficult situation to deal with, and it wasn't a very fun thing to deal with in terms of counterplay, right? Because all of a sudden you don't get to play the game. A soft counter, at the very least, says there are ways for me to limit what you're trying to do, but also that means that there are ways for you to play around it, in a similar fashion to how some anti-mobility spells already work in the game. Specifically, I think Poppy W is a good example of how anti-mobility can be done in a way that doesn't invalidate mobile champions, right? Poppy kind of says, I can stop you, and if I get a successful block, then it punishes you harder. But also, this is an ability with a very short duration to it that I have to time well. And if I use this ability for its other use case, which is movement to maybe look for a wall stun or something, then I'm not getting the value out of the block for it. So there's tension in what Poppy wants to use the ability for, which is already very good. But also, it means that there is counterplay to it. Poppy has this ability. If she presses W, you can hold your dashes until after it wears off, and then you can go ham on all of your dashy buttons. And it means that because she has this ability, there need to be other ways of approaching this champion and other ways of dealing with her in order to get in close. So how does this all relate to Vex? Now, Vex, I think, has a couple of very interesting anti-mobility measures in her kit, one of which I think is a little underrated. I know a lot of people were kind of looking at the Doom passive and saying, okay, well, how are you going to stop, right? This doesn't do anything against blinks, because blinks are more or less instant. There's nothing you can do to stop that, right? If Zed presses W, Zed has W'd away. You're never going to be able to press the button fast enough to deal with that, and while some dashes you will be able to stop, something like a Kai'Sa ultimate you may not have the timing for because that ability is extremely fast. In this regard, I think Doom still does a good job because a champion can't dash if they're terrified, and Vex has a extremely reliable way of applying Doom's Terrify with her W in particular. That's why I focused on that more often. I know any of her abilities can apply the Terrify, but the W is the best in business at doing that because it is instantaneous and doesn't require targeting. It doesn't matter how quick that champion is, as long as you can press W while they're in a vague AoE around you in order to get the stun, right? That's, I think, a good example of a way to make it so that you do have a counter to what this champion wants to do. Obviously, there will be some situations where you don't have the timing on it, or it's a blink champion, but being able to just terrify a champion in general prevents them from using mobility, and therefore is a counter to mobility, regardless of whether or not it actually stops a dash or not. The other thing I would say as well is that this is sort of the pro-focused area of Vex's anti-mobility, in that this is a very pro-oriented ability, right? Like, the timing on this has to be so, lickety-split. You have to be able to get this in potentially the window of maybe a half second or less, right? Because a lot of dashes in the game don't last very long, and it's sort of the cleanse situation, right? Where if you can't cleanse the ability in the duration of the CC, right? If you're pressing your button to get out of the CC, but you're pressing it after a second's already elapsed, well, it doesn't matter. The sun's worn off by now, right? And so it doesn't matter that you got the cleanse. And in that regard, right, like, that's one of those things that does limit your ability to get effectiveness out of it, and it's more of a pro thing, right? Pros are very easily able to get value out of cleanse because they do have that reaction time, and that's sort of where Doom is at to me. The biggest thing, however, I think is Gloom, and Gloom is a good soft counter because, again, it doesn't stop those mobile champions from playing the game. It says you can dash as much as you want, but how much are you willing to pay for it in terms of HP? And it makes there sort of be an interesting play pattern where these mobile champions need to rely on their mobility, right? That's one of the reasons why they're picked. That's one of their biggest defensive maneuvers, is the fact that they are super mobile. But if they're doing that, and again, you can't stop auto attacks with mobility, they're targeted. They're always going to hit you as long as I was able to right-click you and complete the animation. So if they're dashing around constantly and Vex is nearby, Vex will always be able to guarantee bonus damage against that champion. And the beautiful part of Vex's kit as well is she doesn't even have to auto-attack, because she has two abilities that can proc Gloom, her Q and her W. So Vex doesn't even have to step up to auto-attack. She can do fade-away Qs and proc the bonus Gloom damage, or press W and proc the bonus Gloom damage. And because if a Yasuo or Aurelia, for example, keeps dashing, then they just refresh that mark and can then take more bonus damage. So again, it's a soft counter in the form of that it doesn't stop the champion from doing it, but it does really make it so that those champions are going to have a bad time if they continue to try and dash around. So I think it's a very interesting design for Vex, and I also think it's a very good way for Riot to inject counterplay into the game that doesn't involve going into the realm of hard counters. I think League has always been about soft counters and being able to outplay your way out of even really, really bad situations by having the ability to, you know, outplay even, you know, a counter pick matchup. So in that regard, I think this is a good place for the game to be. But those are just my opinions on any of this. Let me know down in the comment section below if you think Vex's anti-mobility isn't as good as it should be, or if there are other things you would much rather see instead in the form of anti-mobility. So let me know all that down in the comment section below. If you enjoyed the video today, go ahead and leave it a like. And if you really enjoyed the video, consider subscribing. I upload a video every Monday, Friday, and on patch days as well. Once again, thank you guys so very much for watching. I do appreciate it. And I'll talk to you all later.